All right. Great. Okay. All right. Well, good evening again, everybody. Thankful to have you all here and those who are watching from home to our intimate conversation night that we've started here at Midwives for Haiti. And this evening, we wanted to take a special moment to highlight the core, the founder, the foundation, the reason why Midwives for Haiti exists. So we have Nadene Brunk Eads, as well as Steve Eads here with us this evening. Very excited to have you all virtually. Hope you can feel the energy in the virtual room. And so I just want to start and dive right into our conversation. Nadene, I'm sure that many of us who are also on this call and watching know that you have a very rich history and very great background and stories to share concerning Haiti, Midwives for Haiti, and your work. So I would love to have you reintroduce yourself to those who may be in this room and are curious to know of how to support Midwives for Haiti. I would love to know the history and the foundation. So Nadene, please feel free to take it away, introduce yourself, as well as Steve. Thank you.
I'm Nadene Eads, and Steve is my partner in crime. When it comes to Midwives for Haiti, it wouldn't have happened without his encouragement and his help. And so he may add some things in tonight if I miss anything. I think most people have heard my stories of when I first went to Haiti and was so appalled by the fact that most pregnant people did not get any prenatal care and did not have access to a clinic or hospital, either because of distance or poverty, or the fact that there really just were very few skilled birth attendants in Haiti.
Thank you, Steve. Would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, I am. I'm Steve Eads, Nadine's husband. Nadene and I worked in the same medical office, and I really didn't know her very well. We were too busy during the day, seeing patients. But I had a couple of opportunities when a patient or two of hers needed cesarean sections to talk to her, because she would assist at the surgery. And medical people will know that this is true. Patients might be surprised. We really don't talk about the surgery when we're doing it. We talk about the ordinary things that anybody would talk about in the office. And she told me stories about Haiti and what she did there when she was going there with Ken Heatwall and Mark Shreve. And I was fascinated. And I think the second time she told me about it, I just told her, I want to go with you. And like a lot of people, I got hooked on Haiti and what was going on there, the people, how hard they worked for how little they had, and how important their personal relationships were to them. And my work there actually gave me a renewed appreciation for what I was doing in the United States. I've never seen a maternal death in the US, and I've seen too many in Haiti. And I learned that even the simple things that we're doing make a big difference in the lives of women and their families. So, that's who I am, and in my relationship to Haiti and to Midwives for Haiti. So shortly after Nadene said she wanted to do more than just go there and do clinics. She saw a need to train nurses to be midwives. I told her, I want to help you. And everything just moved on from there.
So I don't know how many people know, I went to Haiti 3 or 4 times before starting the project that we have in Inch, and with the goal of just doing a prenatal care in City Soleil, which is the largest slum in the Western Hemisphere, just outside of Port-au-Prince, and a very, very violent place and a very sad place to this day. But there was an empty clinic, and I thought we were just going to do prenatal care there. I thought that I could get midwives from all over the country to come and spend a week in Haiti, get to know people, and run this clinic that was sitting empty otherwise in City Soleil. And we actually did that for about 5 months. And I had people lined up for months ahead when the violence in City Soleil got too bad and too dangerous. And so we were told, let's put things on hold. And later, a Catholic group of doctors who had contact with a Haitian obstetrician who wanted to start a birth center in Pondiasu, Terracassi area, which is just north of Inch, or west of Inch. And they came to us and said, would you be willing to go there and train nurses to be midwives? And because I couldn't do anything in City Soleil anymore, and I had all these volunteers, and I cannot emphasize to you the importance that volunteers have played in the picture of Midwives for Haiti, in its progress and its success. I had all these volunteers who had gone and wanted to go back, volunteers who had not been, but were willing to go. So I said, why not? We'll move the operation to the Central Plateau, and it'll be safer, and it's exciting to start a birth center. As many of you know, the birth center never happened. And there are many stories to tell between us starting the classes and then withdrawing from that OBGYN who had a lot of less than moral objectives for the center. And I thought I'd leave. I thought we'd leave because the birth center wasn't going to happen. I would just give up. I was depressed. And then Father Jacques, who was the heading up Caritas, which is a Catholic organization that serves many villages, begged us to stay. And got the bishop to come talk to us and talk about the catastrophic maternal mortality in the Central Plateau, and said, hey, switch everything. We'll store your stuff at the rectory. You can have classes where in part of the rectory. And so it was because of their encouragement that we withdrew from the birth center project, which wasn't going to happen anyway, and just continued on with first class. Another thing people don't understand is we didn't have class every day like we do now. We had class only when I could get volunteers, and so there'd sometimes be weeks between us being there. So it took about 3 years for that first class to get anywhere. And it wasn't until we had a Haitian teacher and didn't have to do all the teaching through translators that we realized that the students were missing a lot by getting only translated classes, that once they had someone explain to teach to them in Creole, that their comprehension skyrocketed. And so we vowed that from then on, we would have Haitian teachers. And so class 2 on, we've had Haitian nurse midwives for our teachers.
Yeah, Nadine. So this is great. So I want to take a step back and sort of give everyone sort of the perspective on how we came about to even having this event. And there was something that you mentioned about volunteer support that I think would be really great for you to further illuminate. So to give everyone else background or context, Nadine, I met you in a pink van in Haiti on my arrival to work as a volunteer coordinator back in 2019. So between myself and you and Jane, that was our first interaction. And even that car ride 2-inch from Port-au-Prince was, filled with volunteer resources and supplies, talking about reconstructing the volunteer program. And I can't tell you at the time that I was, working in country and even till now, how much of the current present veteran volunteers that we've had have been talking about their experiences. And so for me and my perspective, as well as others who may be in this room or watching, would like to know more about how integral it was to build volunteer support and how that helped you build the foundation for Midwives for Haiti. A lot of volunteers who would come through to me to submit an application would talk about seeing you at the ACNM conferences or learning about Midwives for Haiti through other midwives based in the US. So I wanted you to talk more about that perspective of how helpful and where the volunteers had came from, where you were interacting with people who were able to follow you into Haiti and help you build what is now Midwives for Haiti.
Well, when I first had the idea that there would be other midwives who were willing to give up a week vacation to go to Haiti and do something very meaningful, I figured I wasn't the only person that would find that fulfilling. And I emailed the ACNM, which, to anyone that doesn't know, the American College of Nurse Midwives had, at that time, we still have a directory, but now it's digital, but we had a written directory that had the district chairs in it. And I emailed the district chairs and said, would you get this message out? Here's what I want to do. I need volunteers to go teach, and it'll cost you about this much plus airfare, which meant, they had to pay for overnight stay at a guest house and translator and transportation to and from the airport and to and from the clinic. Anyway, I had like 90 volunteers within 2 weeks. And so
wow,
that made me say, well, I guess we better do this, so they gave me a lot of incentive. And then we had no curriculum at first, except a book for midwives, which is actually a really good basic book for midwifery, but and it includes some of the life-saving skills, but not nearly as much detail as what we go into now. But because I couldn't be there at the same time they were, I had a full-time job. We'd leave each other notes in a notebook, and what chapters we covered, how the students reacted, just all kinds of notes, where to get good beer, and what what they covered in class, and what just a lot of comments. So that notebook I've actually typed up. That was from the first couple of years. Maybe I should make that available to everyone because it's really, really fascinating. Now that program grew to to when we were there full time, to having, especially when I was there more, when I quit my day job and gave up and started working full time for Midwives for Haiti, I would spend months on end there. And Steve will tell you, we met the most amazing people. The volunteers who came were amazing people. We made lifelong friends, and they problem solved with us. We would see problems. Oh, believe me, there were always immense problems. And we were not always doing the best thing. So we would discuss how to handle it, how to move forward. And people would volunteer to do, let me take on that. I'll write up that class, a class on that. Like Daisy taking on the postpartum program, postpartum visit program, because I wanted volunteers to get into women's homes. And I knew that we had a huge gap in our postpartum care because women went home with dreadful risk factors and there was no follow-up. Daisy took that on. She wrote the program. And then Sarah Taylor, who's with us tonight, writing up the curriculum for the community assessment and community action program, and just teaching us so many things, teaching me a lot about midwifery in rural area and what it does to a community, the effect that it has on a community. So those are just two examples of volunteers who came and said, I loved it when we first introduced them to Haiti and get them. And by Monday evening, they would come back from a clinic, and at supper, they would talk about, so when we do this, they were already a part of Midwives for Haiti. They bought into what we were doing. They were ready to join up. And I would say the majority of volunteers came back again. I mean, a lot of them came back again and felt really some ownership of what was happening, and knew that their voice was very important to Steve and I. We wanted to hear what they were hearing and seeing, and we wanted to learn from their experience. These were midwives who, some of them had years of experience in home birth, years of experience in birth centers, years of experience in hospital births. They had a lot to teach us.
Definitely. I think that's great. I believe Daisy's also in here tonight. So shout out to Daisy and thank you so much. I think that it's really great for people like myself who are still new and getting to know more about the history of Midwives for Haiti to understand sort of the essence, because I think we talk a lot about how within staff and within, teams and partnerships and just how we're represented, it's very like tight-knit family structure. And so it's nice to hear that it really came about because that's how it started, the spirit of kinship and wanting to learn and really bring the best of the best together is how it started. And so there is, I wanted to move a little bit on about talking about some of the impact. So early impact that you were seeing with what Midwives for Haiti was able to do for the Central Department, for rural communities. There was a question in the chat. So I do invite all of you to send questions or comments into the chat, either directly to me or just as an open question. So Nadene, if you could talk about the classes, the students, the school itself that Midwives for Haiti is fundamentally known for. So with the graduating classes from class 1 to the newly graduated class 11 to the class 12 that we just started, sharing some of the impact that you've seen early on and also just throughout the years.
Well, our first class, looking back, had a very poor curriculum compared to what class 11 had. This last class had, all of them were infirmiers, which is our nurses that have had about a 3 to 4 year education. And they had an 18-month program with us, which meets the International Confederation of Midwives standards. Up until that class, we weren't that long. I think a part of it was a sense of urgency on our part to get people the basic skills and out there as soon as possible. But they're, like 2 of the people from the first class are some of our best preceptors. And they've gone on, they started out as auxiliaries, which is like the equivalent of our LPNs. They've gone on to become our registered nurses, infirmiers. And they're excellent teachers. So we cannot say that class 1 all got a terrible education, because they knew they had to keep learning, and they did. And so
Well, that first class took 2 years or a little more, didn't it?
took over almost 3 years to get that first class done. Part of it was that at the time there weren't very many births happening at the hospital. People don't understand how different St. Therese Hospital is to what it used to be. People did not go there to have their baby. Everybody in the Central Plateau stayed home. You went there if you had exhausted every other opportunity for every other treatment, from the local voodoo priest to the local Meituan, who are the traditional birth attendants. And if everything was still going wrong, you went there, and people thought that getting an IV would kill you, because so often when they got an IV, they died, and they died because they got there so late. But that wasn't their understanding of it. Their understanding was you went to the hospital to die. But at least they would try to keep you alive there. So people just didn't go there. I'm not really sure how many births, but sometimes it was difficult to get the students to have a lot of birth experience. So that's one of the reasons that we took so long with that first class. Now there's, what was it, Jane? 350 some babies per month. I mean,
That's correct.
Crazy.
Yeah.
It
is insane.
But it's now a place, and for those of you who don't know, we pay all the midwives who are there, except for a couple that are paid by the government. I think maybe 2 or 3 out of the 18 or 20 that are there. And it is a place where women want to come to have a baby. Some of them still have their babies at home? Yes. And yet some of them come a long way to have their baby there. That's a big change from 2006 to now. Is very few babies used to be born there.
There is another question, sort of similar to what we're discussing now on impact, but talking about how Midwives for Haiti as an organization was received by not only the country, but also the local community. And if there was any initial pushback. I know that you talked about it being a very collaborative effort and really wanting to be high impact with as much resource as possible. But I also want to hear about the journey to having built a lot of the collaborations that Midwives for Haiti currently has, either through donor support. So we know that Every Mother Counts and Bon Secours are two of our major donors and financial supporters. And so if you could talk more about collaborations with Partners in Health, Sami Sante, or any sort of integration that Midwives for Haiti grew and developed into having, that we now are very grateful to have.
The initial pushback that we got, of course, we had to get permission to be at the hospital with the students. And that was really rocky at first because they didn't quite understand what we were doing. I was told at first, well, we already train midwives. And what they meant was the program that they had for traditional birth attendants that at one time was supported by WHO. And there was a whole curriculum for that, which is actually quite good if you, for matwans, but not for skilled birth attendants. And then when they began to understand and they saw what our midwives did at the hospital, they wanted us there. So there's never been pushback from hospital administration as far as us being there at the hospital. They've always wanted us there. Sometimes
But that's not exactly true.
Yeah.
We got fired
one
we got
time.
fired
Yeah.
one time. I've only been fired in Haiti. I've been fired twice in Haiti.
So yeah, and that was because of a volunteer who did some very questionable things. And so we had to come in and many meetings that week. The students couldn't go to clinical. Yeah, we could tell you stories, but it was because a volunteer posted something on quite a bit of stuff on social media that was very negative about the hospital. Granted, the hospital was terrible and everything she said was true, but it made things look very bad. I mean, it just was an unacceptable way to partner to us to work with a partner. And now on the more national level, I started going to Port-au-Prince to meet people who were both in charge of education, in charge of midwifery, in charge of health, people at the Ministry of Health. And that was a journey too, because I'd get somewhere with someone and they'd say, okay, let me show these materials and tell my supervisor all about this. And then you come back in 6 weeks, which I would do, and they would be gone. There's so much turnover in the government and we just couldn't get anywhere. And what a lot of people don't realize is to this day, there is not a national exam for midwives, national boards. There is for the infirmiers, but there's for licensing infirmiers, but there is not for midwives. Mm-hmm. And they have always welcomed us into that conversation of what midwifery should look like. They have always said, we wish you were doing this, but don't stop what you're doing. It was always, don't stop what you're doing, always. One of the ways that we've partnered with the government in the last few years that I really happened mainly after I retired, was that the government started building clinics in some of these remote areas that we had been going to with mobile clinics. And we now provide, they don't have the funds to provide prenatal care, to provide midwifery, to provide birth center services. And we now go to 8 of those rural clinics that are owned by the government. They supply the space and some security and secure our storage items. And sometimes some medication that is really iffy. So that's how we partnering with the government, and the local government and the national government has always been very important to us. Some of our partnerships with other organizations, Bon Secours gave us our first grant, and that was really important for us to be able to hire a Haitian teacher before that. So that was for class 2. We had some of the sisters from Bon Secours to visit us and became very strong believers in what we were doing. And Bon Secours has been assisted us from the very beginning as a part of their mission, their global mission, to work on both maternal and infant mortality. Every Mother Counts came to us
Because we had a volunteer.
Yeah, because of a volunteer.
Without volunteers, Every Mother Counts would not be a supporter of Midwives for Haiti. And without a volunteer, we wouldn't have had a pink Jeep. There are a lot of important things that have. I wonder what we have missed over the past more than a year now, because we haven't been able to have volunteers.
Exactly. I did want to highlight Melissa from Every Mother's Counts is here. So thank you for being a part of the timeline, the story. It's just wonderful to hear everything and also see it in real life. So thank you.
Hi everyone. Sorry, I have to have my camera off. It's great to hear the incredible stories and to finally meet you, Nadene, over camera. I've just heard so much about you over the years.
Have I met you?
You have not. You probably last knew Jessica Bowers, who was managing our grant making work for many years, but she transitioned out of the organization back in 2020. And I've been managing our grant making work since.
Okay, glad to meet you.
Likewise.
Yes, it was because of a volunteer who came to check us out and who arrived actually during that week that we got fired from the hospital and went to the meetings with us, and then came back to help us get the Jeep. And she could see that we were having a big impact, especially in our mobile clinics and reaching lots of women. And she became a strong believer that we could use some more help. So she's the one who talked to Christy and her delegation when Christy first visited Haiti, looking for something to do to make a difference in the maternal mortality rate in Haiti. And it has been a wonderful partnership, because the first birth center would not have happened without them. And thousands of lives have been affected by their assistance.
Yes. And again, I know many of us on this call and those listening can also attest to that aspect of impact over the years. So it's just really nice again to hear how everything came about. So thank you for sharing that. I also wanted to move forward. Again, if anyone has any questions or comments or anything to say in between, feel free to hop in. I wanted to touch base on some more of your philosophy and vision for Midwives for Haiti. So just to highlight that we are in our campaign season, our end of the year campaign. And again, the reason for us sitting and having this discussion with you, Nadene, is, we're taking a bit of our through the years, some nostalgia. Our theme for this campaign is celebrating our past and building our future. And so as you're currently retired as a former executive director with Midwives for Haiti and as the founder, Nadene, what are some of your future hopes that you would have? I know we're in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic and we're not too sure of what's to come in the next few years or so, but we have recently announced that we are building a new birth center, which is one of the goals that you initially stated that you wanted to happen. And there are a number of big goals that we as an organization would like to achieve. So it would also be nice to hear some of your future hopes for Midwives for Haiti.
Well, I want to go back a few years and talk about the fact that there is a book that had a major impact on me. It's a very short little book called Monique and the Rainy Season. And it is a true story of a midwife in Africa and her friendship with a woman who from the US who was serving in the Peace Corps and who was instrumental in getting her a birth center in a village. And it literally was a mud floor, but protected from the rain and sun by a roof. And the impact that that midwife had on her village and the women, the health of the women was amazing. So I have always believed that every woman needs access to a midwife, and that hospitals, out of both economy and need, should be available, but shouldn't be the first choice for birth to take place in most rural communities around the world. So my vision has always been that every village would have a midwife like Monique in Africa, that whether it's a little one-room hut or a very beautiful birth center like our Carrie Wortham Birth Center, whether it's small or large, if the right people are there with the right training and the right equipment, the medication to stop the bleeding, the medication to stop the seizures, and the skill to identify anything that's abnormal in pregnancy, then lives will be saved. And so if people aren't completely aware, the Carrie Wortham Birth Center served for many years the people in like 19 to 20 communities around that, in the mountains around that valley. But 2 other birth centers popped up in the area and the need was not as great there. We now have land that's been given to us in Fonbrun that is a terribly needy area. Our mobile clinics have been going to Fonbrun, and going once a month, we would see over 100 people a day. We always had to send a whole team and a lot of volunteers to serve the women in one day. Now we've been going once a week and we still have the biggest crowd there, and there's not a good place for them to birth. So putting a birth center in Fonbrun will have a huge impact on the health of the women in the community. And I'm just so excited about the prospect, because even though every village should have one, at least the largest villages we can start. We'll start with one. Mm-hmm. And a birth center is a couple things. In addition to helping the women, it's a good model for the students on the way things should be done and the way things can be done. It's a great place for students to train. It's a great place to model to the government. You don't have to build more hospitals. You need more birth centers.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I do remember going, I think Fonbrun was Monday clinic, and just the midwives, the staffs, and sometimes volunteers would be there from 9 to 4. So it will definitely be a packed place. So I too, just like everyone else, am very excited to see the new Carrie Wortham Birth Center being built in Farnborough. So thank you so much, Nadine. Thank you so much, Steve, for sharing that insight. I will ask everyone else or anyone else in the chat who has any questions that they want to bring to the floor or any other comments to share or thoughts so far with all of the stories that Nadine has graced us with this evening. I, for one, Nadine, I would love to see the book of notes that you had mentioned. I think that that would be a great resource for people interested in hearing about your perspective and your philosophies and your beginnings into creating something as great as Midwives for Haiti. We do have a question from, I will read the first one from Cecily. Okay, this is a great question. So I'll read it verbatim. It says, Nadine, as you reflect on the years you spent building the organization, I'm sure you can recall many setbacks, disappointments, and heartaches. Can you reflect on how you kept going? Thank you for that wonderful question.
I would say that my biggest motivation for keep going were the Haitian midwives themselves. And that very first class, and I've told this story before, but we were flying into this small gravel airstrip in Inch. And on my first visit, I wasn't actually the first midwives. Jessica Jordan and Sharon Ryan were the first midwives who have been there. And a couple of weeks later, I arrive and we have the classes again. And on Saturday, when it was time to fly out, two of the midwives came and brought gifts and sat on the grass and watched us fly away, waving and waving. And I sobbed because I had promised them that I would come back. And I knew they were counting on me. They were counting on us. And when I came back, they said that I was the first to come back, that lots of people through the years had been to Inch or to Haiti in some way, that they had met and said, I hope I see you again. I want to see you again. But few people came back. And that was what inspired me the first few years, was just knowing there were these 8 women who so badly wanted to learn, both for their community and for their own personal growth, and who were just soaking up information. And as we moved on, I would say that Steve was a huge help. It was nice having him to go to with, like, what am I going to do about this? And tell him about the situation, talk it over. And because he'd been there, have him problem solve with me. So he was a huge part of why I could keep going.
Yeah, I developed a favorite saying from being in Haiti so many times, that every solution had a problem. But you just, persistence, and a lot of other people would come up with ways to solve problems. Yeah, 2 people on the call tonight, Emmanuel and Mario. They helped us solve so many issues. So Nadine kept everything going, but I think the success is due to really hundreds of other people that really made all this possible.
Well, and I think about how hard the midwives work at St. Therese and in the clinics. They still are my inspiration. It's not easy being a midwife in the United States. It's even much harder in Haiti, not just physically, emotionally, the stuff they see, the stuff they have to do day after day. They're still my biggest incentive. But yes, without wonderful translators who, you know, Emmanuel saw me through many times when I needed to meet with government officials or get some paper signed or some document. He knew people and knew where to go, knew Port-au-Prince really well. So at the beginning, he was a huge assistant. And today, Mario has a job description that is almost unfathomable. And we are so grateful that in this time of pandemic, the Haitians have taken over Midwives for Haiti and are doing the work of both seeing the people in the clinics and teaching a class.
As intended. I love that. There's a lot of praise in the chat. I want to shift gears slightly. Some questions are being asked in regards to current programs. So questions about volunteers coming back to Haiti, questions about what is to happen with the old Carrie Wortham Birth Center. And Nadene, if you would like for me to switch over to Jane, who, as we all know, is our current executive director, she would be able to give some insight on that.
I think those are perfect questions for Jane.
Yes.
Oh, good. No, thank you so much for asking those questions, Leah. Those are two things that are obviously at the top of our list thinking about. The old Carrie Wortham Birth Center actually belongs to the Catholic Church in that area, so they will be just going back and using it for church stuff. There's also a school there, so I mean it's in a little complex kind of thing. So I'm sure it will be repurposed for something really brilliant. As for when volunteers will be able to come to Haiti again, oh my goodness, you guys, if I had my druthers, it would be tomorrow. I mean, I cannot wait for the volunteers to come back. We all just, we need your energy, we need your excitement. You keep us going sometimes. So I wish I had a date for that. The answer is when I can keep you guys safe. I need you to be safe. And when that happens, believe me, I will shout it from the rooftops for all of you.
Thank you so much, Jane. I myself, and much like all of our staff, are very anxious to be able to join Mario and supporting him in all of the many hats that he has now been wearing as a result of the pandemic. But as for me, listening to your stories, Nadene, I too have just seen a glimpse of that volunteer impact. And so I can also, speak to how important and essential that aspect is.
I wanted to add to what Jane said about the Carrie Wortham Birth Center. We never owned the building. We never bought the building. We did renovate it and we paid quite a bit of money to have it renovated, thanks to Every Mother Counts. But we never owned the land or the building, and that actually caused some problems. Water, electricity were really difficult because it wasn't ours. And so that's something very exciting about this new birth center is we're going to own the land, we're going to own the building, and we will have the say over what happens with electricity and water.
Lovely. So big things ahead. That is, as far as I'm concerned with my questions, I'm very much fulfilled. I've finished my tea. I feel like this has been a great intimate conversation with the Eads. And I really am very thankful to have all of you here to join in on our end of the year campaign event. I encourage you all to revisit the website, midwivesforhaiti.org/donate, and offer some support to our programs and for us to be able to continue doing what we do best. So I will leave you all with that. Nadine, Steve, if you have any closing words to provide for everyone here.
When I think about Midwives for Haiti now, I am just so grateful for Jane, for Brett, for you, Anna, for Mario, for Miss Limon, who teaches that class day after day, for Daisy, who has dedicated herself to improving and making the curriculum a very thorough curriculum, for Sarah, who it still makes an impact with her donation of the tablets that the students use, and for the community assessment project that the students do to this day. So many people to thank. And that's what we feel when we think of Midwives for Haiti. We're just so grateful that it can go on without us.
Lovely. All right. Well, thank you all so much for being a part. And we will be in touch. Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas,
Thank you.
everyone.
Yes, thank you so much. All right.